Hey guys, this is Shane with Dialed MTB. I wanted to show you how I do my basic maintenance routine, and we're going to start off with washing the bike first, because when your bike is clean, it's always easier to work on it. I start off by lightly spraying the bike with the water not on like a super high pressure, because you don't want the high pressure to get into all the bearings or any of that. And just get the whole bike, and then I spray it down with Simple Green. It's just half Simple Green, half water. And then I use a pretty firm bristle brush for the drivetrain parts. One thing that you can do even when you're not just washing your full bike is just your drivetrain, because a clean drivetrain and a clean chain equals a longer lifetime of all that without having to replace anything. So what I do is just get this wet real quick, spray some Simple Green on it, and then I Simple Green the chain too. Then I spray some Simple Green on the brush, and then I just lightly press it on the rear cassette and just run it backwards. And then the same thing, I just put the brush on the chain, and I do all four sides. So the bottom, then you switch it over and do the top, and then you do the inside, and then you do the outside. And then you make sure you wash everything off really well, because you don't want any of the leftover Simple Green still on there when you get done. So you just make sure you wash it all off, spray the chain off really well, spray off the chain ring, and that's how you quickly wash your drivetrain and make it last a lot longer. When you get done washing your bike, make sure to wipe the chain off so there's no water on it, and then you're going to want to lube it right away. And lubing, you always want to lube on the inside so that when you lube it, it's on the inside, and when you're spinning, it spins to the outside. So if you were to lube it right here and you're running your chain, it would go out and it would never have a chance to seep through to the rest of the chain. Then when you get done lubing your chain and running it a few times, you want to wipe all the excess oil off. Another thing for your drivetrain is when you get done riding for the day, leave your chain on one of the lowest cogs. I leave it in either the lowest or the second to lowest cog, so that there's not so much tension on your chain overnight or for a week or however long you're going to leave your bike sitting for. When you get done washing your bike, you're going to want to look through the whole thing, because it's cleaner than it was before, so it's going to be easier to spot any defects. So if you have a carbon frame, you want to look through it in any of the areas underneath and look for any cracks. And if you have an aluminum frame, you want to look at all the welds. This is a carbon, but there'll be welds in all these areas right here, down in here, down here probably. And you want to look for any cracks in the welds for aluminum frames. Okay, when you guys get done going through your frame and making sure there's no cracks or defects in it, you're going to want to go through it and tighten all the bolts. You don't want to yank down on anything, especially if it's a carbon frame, because you could damage your frame. So if you are going to be tightening anything fully, you do want to use a torque wrench to the specified manufacturer's recommended torque specs. A tool that I like to use just for going through and checking all the bolts on my bike is just one of these 3-way hex wrenches. It's got a 4, 5, and 6 on it, so it literally covers almost everything on your bike. I do have a couple others that have like the T25 and smaller hexes, but this right here will get you through the majority of your bike. You're going to want to check things like your rotor-railer hanger, your linkage, your cranks, which is an 8mm on most of them, so it won't be on this, so you'll have to use something else, but it's good to check every once in a while. And then you want to check your linkage bolts, and then your rear shock, your seat post clamp, and your seat clamps. And then your handlebar controls up here, just make sure they're snug. On these, I actually don't make them super tight. I make it so that they can move a tiny bit, just so if you crash, it doesn't bend stuff. So the actual clamps will move instead of bending something that is going to cost a lot of money. And then you're going to want to check all of this up here, make sure it's tight, and as well as your handlebar clamps. Okay, so we turn the bike around so that we can check the bolts on this side. One thing that you're going to check on the front and the rear is the brake calipers, the top and the bottom bolts. And then on the back, it's going to be these two. And then you're going to want to check the axles on the front. Most of them will be like a quick release, and you won't want to yank it down too much because then it won't tighten. You just want to get it in a nice spot so that it'll click in like that. And then on the rear, if you have a quick release, do the same thing. And if it's not, then you definitely want to check it with just your regular hex wrench, because that is a very important thing to make sure that it's actually tight. Another thing to check is your pedals. You definitely don't want those falling off while you're riding. So it's either going to be a 6 or an 8mm hex wrench. So this is just a nice pedal wrench from Vital MTV. I just put it right in there. And they are directional, so each pedal does go differently. So one easy way to tell is to tighten either side is the way that you pedal. So you want to go down the way that you pedal, and you don't want to yank on it, but just tight enough. Next, you're going to want to go through your shocks and check the air pressure for them. And using a shock pump, you'll be able to do that. So on the forks right here, it'll be this cap right here. Then you'll thread the shock pump onto the fork. And as soon as you don't want to tighten it too much, but as soon as it shows you the air pressure, then let it go and let it sit for a second, and then pump it up to your desired amount. I'm going to go to 95. And then when you release it, it'll sound like air's releasing, but really that's just the air coming out of the hose. Then you'll do the same thing that you did for the forks for the rear suspension if you have a full suspension mountain bike. And you'll want to do it to the manufacturer's recommended settings. Those will be the closest and get you in the ballpark for where your bike's going to be the best for you for your weight. Okay, next we're going to check tire pressure. This is something that I personally do before every single ride. I literally do it right before I load up my bike to go ride. Because if your tire pressure is the same and consistent, you're going to get the most consistent feeling bike and ride every ride. I like to use a digital tire pressure gauge, because then once again it gets more consistent feeling if you can do it exactly accurate every time. But the gauges on the shock pumps, these are pretty accurate most of the time. So another thing you're going to want to check is if your wheels have any play in them. So one way that I like to do it is if you just hold the brake on of whichever wheel you're checking and just kind of rock it back and forth. And see, there's no play going back and forth right there. And you can do that in the front also. Hold the brake and go like this. And there's no clanking or anything going on, so that means that everything's going to be solid for your next ride. So in summary, I check my tire pressure every single ride, and most of the times I lube by chain, but I go on a little bit longer rides. So if you're going on only 10 miles or less, you can do it every other ride. Cleaning your chain, I would do it about every third time that you actually lube your chain. And so that's like I showed you out with a hose and your rear cassette and your chain and everything. Or if you have a park tool or one of the chain cleaner tools, you can use that also. Also, before every ride, I do just a real quick visual inspection of my bike and just make sure there's nothing out of spec or out of line that doesn't look right. And then for every 3 or 4 rides, I'll go through and do the bolt check. I'll actually go through and make sure everything's tight. And then cleaning, it's all based on how dirty your bike gets, how muddy it is, and all of that.